Welcome to Undertalk with Toster and Jaye. We're going to talk about cool stuff from the late 80s and also from the 90s. My name is Jay Muller, and here's our guest host, Padraig Parkhurst.
Hello, my name is Padraig Parkhurst, and I'm a musicologist all the way from Australia. And I specialize in East German rock music from the 70s and 80s. This week we're going to be flipping the boards, and instead I will be guest hosting and interviewing Toster and Jaye. Hello.
Hello from Berlin to Down Under, Padraig.
Hello, Padraig. Hi, Toster.
Thank you so much for having me back on the show. This week I thought it could be good to go all the way back to the beginning. Toster, how was the band Die Anderen formed?
Actually, Die Anderen were formed because I was rejected by Feeling B, one of the predecessors of Rammstein. I've been around with Feeling B since 1983, and especially Alyosha, the singer, was a great inspiration for me. And after like 1.5 years, Feeling B decided they wanted to have a bass player because they were not happy with Flake playing the bass on keyboards anymore. And I said, well, here I am. I'm actually a guitar player, but because I wanted to belong to them and wanted to be part of a already kind of a established group. I said, well, I can do that. And I bought a bass, and then after a few rehearsals, I think it was Paul Landers, said, well, you don't fit the mold. I'm sorry, but you will not be our bass player. And I was very disappointed. But then there was a friend around the Feeling B musicians at those days, and he said, well, I have another musician. He's living in Friedrichshain, which is another borough. And he has a rehearsal room. And we should meet him. And then we met. And then we did a jam session at the friend's place. That was in Berlin, Pankow, Bindstraße, at Sylvester and New Year's Eve 1985. And that was basically the start of Die Anderen. And the original name was Musikfabrik. A graphics logo still exists. But we became Die Anderen because we thought it's a funny name.
Now seems as good a time as any to listen to a track by Feeling B. Alles ist so dufte, from the recording sessions of the Dave-Film Flusten und Schreien.
Auf diesem Stern ist mir geboren. Auf diesem Stern ist ich ein Mann. Why? Why? Why is my why?
Now, Die Anderen, as a name, kind of took on a life of its own when Amiga started using it to refer to a whole range of alternative bands that had their playing license, their Spielerlaubnis. How did that come about?
I can't say much about it because I wasn't with Amiga. I don't have much insight. Well, you should probably talk to Wolf-Dietrich Fruck, who was the producer then, back in the days. And I only know that they came to us, or we came to them, I don't know, because we already had a radio recording. And so they probably thought we have reached that level of professionalism that they could dare to give us like a 3-song recording session in the, spectacular studio in Brunnenstraße in Berlin-Mitte, which was actually crap. And so this guy came to us, I think it was Wolf-Dietrich Fruck, because René Büttner, the boss of it all, I just got to know much later. And they said, we want to do the usual. We knew the sampler already, that kind of a split album, 4 bands on one vinyl, 2 bands on each side. And they planned to have a record with hard rock bands on the one side and kind of alternative bands on the other side. And I said to Wolf-Dietrich Fruck, you don't have a clue, actually. There's so many bands in this alternative spectrum. You don't need to mix it up with hard rock bands. And we convinced them, actually. But then, when the deal was actually through, what Wolf-Dietrich Fruck thought, he said, well, it's all done. We can do it. We just have to talk about the lyrics a little more. And I said, what? I already told you we won't change a word. Well, you can't sing that Freitagabend in Berlin thing like, I don't know, unterirdische Kommandoaktion, irgendwer kassiert den Judaslohn, Ehemänner onanieren im Puff. You can say that on record. I said, well, then you can't press us. So no, fuck off, you bloody idiot. And I just hung up. There was a public payphone in the Prenzlauer Allee. I remember as vividly as it would have been yesterday. So, and then it was all gone. And then after a couple of months, the record came out and it was named the anderen bands. And I thought, mofos, what are you doing? I mean, we didn't agree to take part and it just stole our name. And I'm so pissed until this day that we're actually, when the occasion or when it just, the situation seemed fit, I said, we have to invent another name for that genre of music in the GDR between 85 and 89.
That's a really interesting story. Now, one of the other terms that was bouncing around, which I've seen a lot in reviews from the time, is Die Neuen Bands. So what exactly was so new about these bands for the GDR in the mid to late 80s?
Well, new, I think it was just where the time for the so-called, I would call them underground bands, they came out of the underground, sort of. They stuck their heads out. They became more known. I could play in clubs. I think that's what was referred to first as new bands, maybe. I can't remember. I don't think there was a big group name for all these bands in the beginning. It just was bands. They were new, but and they became known by just being allowed to play. And, they were not the Pudis, they were not Lift, they were not Karat and all that stuff. They were more unorganized, maybe little punky bands, and they just had to come up with a name, I suppose.
And of course, some of these other bands, or new bands, were in fact existing punk bands who had just changed their name, like Große Extra, who became hard pop. Here's one of their tracks as Große Extra, Gefühlslalom.
The band were probably new only to the journalists and the functionaries. If you would have been around for a while and streetwise and stuff, and you were, know the clubs and queue up at night and know the secret spots and stuff, you wouldn't think they were so new. But, as journalists always strive to do, they need a headline to sell it. They also, mostly of them are freelancers, so they also sell it already internally in the newspaper or in the Mac, in the Newsmac. So they have to make it special because even the journalists are kind of, the marketers of their own ideas. That was the first thing. The other thing was that, of course, there was a difference between, let's say, City and the mentality of a Tony Krah, or, well, not so much about Georgi Gogov, but like Tony Krah, or even Fritz Puppel, for instance, is a good example. Because we thought differently. Well, basically, the heroes of the old East German rock scene, like from Prinzip, Karat, Pudis, etc., Cities also, they were businessmen. They were businessmen up to a point that their business was more important than freedom of expression. And we were different because we were much younger. And we also were, I can only speak for myself, because I was 18 in the year 1983. And that was, if you look up history, it was kind of the peak of the Cold War era. It almost happened. I remember we had the Able Archer war games in West Germany. We had the Korean aircraft shut down over the Soviet Union. And there was also the issue, which became only known later, of the, I think, Oberst Semyonov, who did not activate the Soviet missiles against a perceived American attack because it was a mistake. But it could have happened in 83. And we thought, first, we, as the 18-year-olds, we might experience nuclear war. Secondly, I thought I want to get the most out of it for the remaining years, and I won't go to the army and I don't will do this and that. I would just finish my apprenticeship and I would do music. And so we didn't have much to lose back then because I thought Armageddon is inevitable. So that was a difference between the folks like from city.
That's interesting to hear from me because I don't know if it's the age thing. I'm, a couple years younger, but I never had these sort of fears or thought that this might be the end or something. I just wanted to make music. I wanted to have fun. I didn't have personal problems, or my family also had no, fear of survival that didn't really exist in East Germany. But for me, I didn't have those fears at all that Toaster just described. Interesting. I never knew that.
No, well, it got up to a point already in the late 70s because we had that in school. You might remember that we had Wehrkunde in school, which is actually kind of a military education.
Never had that.
You should have. I mean, it was introduced when it was introduced mandatory when I got into the 9th grade, I think. And so basically we had that sirens and they would like howl at night and stuff, basically for the firefighters. But I always waited for that kind of sound that would, announce the air raid. And I had actually, I was a phobic, I was a fearful teenager, but I had kind of a emergency package under my bed. Because we actually in our new buildings out there in the outskirts, the new building area in Berlin-Buch, or socialist new buildings, they had nuclear shelters in the basement.
I never experienced any of that stuff, I have to say. Neither, I can't remember Wehrkunde, what you just said, or any shelters or any sirens.
Oh, you didn't have that in Bizet-Straße?
Interesting.
You didn't have that in Bizet-Straße?
Definitely not.
But we had that all the new buildings in the outskirts of Berlin-Buch. They all had that kind of doors that were ready to be sealed and the kind of type of windows that you could lock like on a submarine, stuff like this. And they were already prepared for nuclear war. Actually, the buildings.
If you had this sense of existential dread and this feeling that you had nothing to lose, why not go off the grid and only play in church shows, keep everything totally underground and unofficial like some of these earlier punk groups did? Why did you and other groups choose to go ahead and get your playing licenses?
Well, for me, I can speak for me. My first Einstufung was with my previous band before the anderen. It's called Kleinkariert, and we did that, I think, in 84. And it was just so we could play wherever we wanted to. I think that was the thing. And also we had a specific amount of money that we can demand for our shows. And that was just made it super easy to deal with everything.
There are many possible answers. First of all, Einstufung was the ticket to the party. I saw Feeling B with the first Einstufung, I think in 83 and maybe November. And they instantly got Sonderstufe. They had a beautiful show. They had like a plastic curtain, a transparent plastic curtain, and they would spray with a fluorescent and they would spray Feeling B on it, and it would have UV lights, and it looked just fantastic. And then they just started strumming. It was really punk. And the Einstufungskommission gave them a Sonderstufe. And I thought, well, that's impossible. But that can't be. And so I thought, well, they can do it. We can do it. That was the first thing. That was the inspiration. And then also, I've been to the church concerts. I've been a blues man before. And I went to the blues messe. And I figured first, churches sound shitty. Second, equipment is worse. And third, I'm not sure if I wanted to exchange the FDJ haunches for the church guys, which, I'm sorry, always seemed to me kind of suspicious. And somehow not the guys you want to be with. I certainly didn't want to be with them. So I thought, well, I didn't have as much problems with the official FDJ Kreiskulturkabinett guys, like maybe other folks had said. We had actually in Friedrichshain, they were quite liberal. We had actually we had a supporter by the name of Thorsten Ottersberg. I hope he's still alive and prosperous. He was also a musician, and he wasn't envious of new bands. He was very helpful. He said, "You should do the Einstufung. I support you." And he was in the jury, and so we did our first Einstufung, I think, in late fall of 1985, and we got the Mittelstufe, which wasn't so good for the contracts and the money and all that stuff, but we could play. We had a license to play, and it didn't hurt actually. We just cheated on the Einstufungskommission. They required a certain number of original works and all that stuff. We didn't have that, so we just kind of had a cheat list and doubled the entries, and then we would if they would call, like for this and that song, we would play this and that, or cheating basically. But it never happened. They were okay, and we got a Mittelstufe, and that was it. It's not a big deal.
Now, there's this fabulous passage from Tony Kral's autobiography where he speaks about exactly this, gaming the Einstufung system. He said, the trick was to write down the 40% Western songs which could be played at any time. For the songs from the socialist world, we invented phantom titles, songs that didn't exist, and simply wrote original composition in the composer information. We had actually rehearsed 2 or 3 instrumental pieces, plus 2 or 3 pieces from Hungary or Poland in the list, so we ended up with 5 or 6 titles we could actually play, but not 15. Now, that passage is about the early 1970s, but what did this process look like in the early to mid-1980s? Did you have to provide lyrics or song lists?
Yes. We would just give them, I don't know, something. I think that I put down some German lyrics because it had to be German, and I think I just filed some fake lyrics or something. I mean, they didn't, research the issue. They just wanted that we would respect the routine. So that was not really an interrogation or, an acquisitive process or something.
I remember we had to give list of songs, of course, but also member names and addresses, like administrative stuff more. And also, I do remember that afterwards gave you a 1-page sort of assessment of how they thought the show was and what we could improve and all that. I still have that actually from one of the Einstufung from Kleinkariert.
I'd love to
see
it.
Where they, told us this and this was good and this and that could be better. But it was very harmless in a way, if I remember that right.
I can't remember a sheet of paper, but I remember a verbal verdict.
I still have it. That's why I know. I can send it to you if you want. You can look at it.
Actually, there were more experienced musicians in the jury, and not all of them, what they told us, was crap. I mean, they were right in certain ways. Of course, we, being 20 years old, said, blah, 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 blah. But they were right in hindsight. And the other thing was the preparation for the Einstufung also included, you would have to have your employer signing Bescheinigung, that you are fully employed and you're okay worker and all that stuff, and you have allowed to do something in your spare time.
Well, I was 16. That wasn't true for me, so I don't know how they handled that. Apparently there was no age limit, because I know I was 15 or 16 when I did my first one. So.
Well, I still have the paper from my VEB Werk für Fernsehelektronik, and I think I posted it on Facebook. And also, even the technician, which was Dufty at the time, had to get a polizeiliches Führungszeugnis. I don't know what that is in English.
Police check, I believe.
Yeah, no, police check. You have to do that. You had to do that. I'm sure I had to do it as well. It's kind of a routine task, and but also the technician, who was part of the, the eingestufte band. He was part of the band pack, part of the contract scheme, and he also had to have a police check.
I want to add something, that this whole Einstufung thing was very non-political. They never asked you that you're supposed to somehow swear to be loyal to the country or to the political system or anything like that. It was pretty much strictly about the music. I don't think we could have done any protest songs against East Germany, but they never asked for anything in return except the good performance.
Well, it's basically like doing a driving license and having, like the Prüfung for that. Is you won't tell the Prüfer that you want to become a racetrack driver. You just drive as peaceful as you can and slow as you can because you just want to get the damn paper. And then after that,
Yeah.
you can do anything else.
Now, Jay, you mentioned that you started playing at 15 or 16. A number of other musicians that I've spoken to, like, for instance, Uwe Hasbecker, spoke about having curfews, i.e. they weren't allowed to play past 10 p.m. on a school night. Was that also something that you had to deal with?
I think I had the advantage of being younger, meaning this whole thing was later for me. Uwe Hasbecker, I think he's probably, I don't know, 10 years older than me or something like that. And so I had different experiences for that reason, probably. I never had any curfews. I was in the middle of Berlin, of the city always. I had nothing like that. In fact, I was pretty much, my life changed when I was 15. I was making music. I was hanging out. I was starting to drink a little and all that kind of stuff. Make music, be my own person, basically, when I was 15, and nothing like that.
I think it's probably time for another track. Here is Die Anderen's Rotten Spine. Now, you've both spoken about living in East Berlin. Did you get the sense that it was more open there than elsewhere in the country? For instance, Eugen Balenskat of Die Skeptiker suggested to me that because in East Berlin it was westward facing and it was under more scrutiny, you could get away with things there that you couldn't in other places. And certainly some of the musicians I've spoken to from Magdeburg or Leipzig had quite different experiences. Did you notice that? Was there a major difference between East Berlin and other parts of the country, musically or in terms of policing?
I mainly had, when we started with our band, and we had, I think with our second manager, Lars Wünsche, we got to know more bands from like Cottbus and Leipzig, like The Art and Sando, and, we got to know them and talk to them and stuff. And I think they had it harder than we had. Although in Berlin there were boroughs where it was harder than elsewhere, like in Weißensee, for instance, where Jay comes from. There was one person from the VPKA, Volkspolizei Kreisamt Weißensee, Abteilung Erlaubniswesen. Her name was Oberleutnant Brunner, and we called her Kaltenbrunner, which is I think an SS guy. And she was mad at us out of the blue, actually. And I remember a concert in Berlin-Weißensee, Langhahnstraße, might have been in 87. And she kind of, summoned us to the promoter's office and told us, like, if you say something on stage tonight that might, kind of hamper the interests of the German Democratic Republic, you will not go at home tonight. And I thought it's ridiculous, but there were people like that. But basically in Berlin, you had folks like Rainer Berner from Zentralrat, Bezirksleitung der FDJ, and other folks, and they were helpful. They were liberal. They wanted change. They were also, of course, they were inspired by Gorbachev, and yeah, this certainly has been an advantage overall to be being based in Berlin.
Well, I'm from Berlin, so I have never lived in Leipzig or in other cities. So I've only heard from others that I can guess, but they didn't tell me too much how difficult it was. So I can't really say much. But I never felt any problems in Berlin, any restrictions. Again, probably because I'm a little younger and it was all later for me. It all started, my first band in 84, so 83, 84. And then with the anderen in 87, and then I was all over in 89. So I don't have experience with other cities.
It's also, if you look at our photos in the 1980s, we weren't exactly that kind of raunchy bunch who would kind of, set the Palast Republik on fire or something. We were actually some nice guys and knew how to behave, but we had quite some, some naughty lyrics. So I think we kind of profited because we had such a nice image and made we rather were a dance band. We made the people dance, but the lyrics, upon a closer look, they were not so friendly at all.
So, how many punk bands had their Spielerlaubnis when you came onto the scene? I mean, August 1983, that's when Erich Mielke began the Here to Gegen Punk campaign, Hard Against Punk. And yet within a year, you've got all of these groups getting their Spielerlaubnis. What did the scene look like when you first started?
Well, I came from the blues scene. I traveled with what they called Die Kunden, actually the long-haired, Shell Parker wearing jeans, red wine drinking kind of folks who traveled GDR for blues concerts. So when I came to the whole scene, there was basically Fährberliner Straße 7, where Alyosha lived, and there was also Rosa Extra / Hard Pop in the house. They had their rehearsal room there, and I think there was already Die Firma, which was called Firma Trötsch back then. So that was, and then there was also Freigang, but they were not a punk band. They're more like the Tonsteine Scherben kind of, blues rock stuff, and not much more in Berlin that I know of. And it all happened later, after 85. And, I talked to Dufty about the pre-83 punk persecution, actually. And he explained to me, because he knew the folks since the late 70s, because he was part of it, living in Fischerinsel, Berlin Mitte. He said lots of the punk scene were actually criminals. They would kind of steal, they would rob, they would, Körperverletzung, all that stuff. And it wasn't all political. It was also, partly criminal. One of the leaders of the East Berlin punk scene, the Colonel, he was, he actually, in the 90s, he became a one percenter, like a rocker. Harley Davidson type of, I don't know if it was the Bones or the Nomads or the Bandidos or something like that. And so, not nice guys, actually. When I met them or when I saw them on the Alexanderplatz where they gathered, I thought, well, I don't want to know you, actually, because they were kind of aggressive. And so that, isn't all that black and white thing that, folks like Hendrik Gericke wants us to believe.
So did you and your fans consider yourselves punks? Or some other subculture? Or something else entirely?
Well, I never considered myself a punk or anything really, except a musician. I remember for a while when I was 15, I wanted to look a little punky, because I saw a guy who had a cool haircut somehow, and I wanted to look like that. But there was nothing else behind it except I wanted to look cool. And then later on, I wanted to look a little bit more like Prince, because I loved Prince. So that's it. But I think our audience, the anderen audience, there were certainly many who probably did consider themselves punks. Not all, but many. Toaster?
I never considered, because I thought I'm not tough enough to be a real punk, so I never considered myself one.
Our audience.
We had punks in the audience. I personally got to know them. They were approaching me, and they were just, back in the day, they were just happy to have music they can dance pogo to. I mean, I remember being in the early 80s, being in a Kulturpark, Plenterwald, and that was always a meeting point for the punks. And they would wait in despair, actually, for for a faster song to dance pogo to. And I remember that when once Panko, which is actually not a punk band, played in the little open air stage, and they had one song. It's called "Killer Killer," which is basically an old saying from the punkers, like "Killer Killer Panko, Killer Killer Panko." That was a fast song, and all of a sudden the punks were like entering the audience place, and they were jumping around like crazy. And I thought, "What's that?" They were so happy to have somebody playing for them. So, and we were one of them, actually. So they were just happy to have, you know, also have a place to go to, because, folks had no phones. I mean, they had to go somewhere and meet like-minded people. And the easiest way was to go to concerts. And if you were kind of, halfway okay, like we were, they would accept you.
So you've mentioned hanging out with a bunch of the other counterwave bands, but was there a sense of community that you felt?
Yeah, for sure. I felt a sense of community. Not, I didn't know everybody very well, but we all sort of met one way or another. Whilst touring, many times there were evenings where there were 2, 3, or maybe 4 bands playing on that evening. So we always met, and the place, East Germany wasn't that big. So we all played in the same places over and over. But I did, I had several friends from different bands, and we were sometimes doing projects together, just on the side, just for fun. No touring really, like just, playing in the rehearsal room or whatever. So definitely I felt a sense of community.
There are many aspects to that. The first is that there was not such a sharp or strict divide between the musicians and the fans, mainly because there were no real backstage areas back then. And, you had to go to the public bar to get a drink. There were no fridges full of Prosecco and vodka in backstage like we have now. First thing. The second thing is musicians had a few places in East Berlin where they met. For instance, the Haus der Jungen Talente in Berlin, Klosterstraße in Mitte, which is also a subway station, was one of the places where they kind of gathered, like weekly, basically. And so there was this communication on certain concerts, and there were a lot of concerts in town. There was a lot of live music in the GDR. And also, you would talk to the fans all the time. I just remember a couple of months ago, I talked to Rummelsnuff, which is now quite famous as this bodybuilder, gay type of proletarian singer now. He's quite famous. And he told me an anecdote that was from the late 80s, maybe 88 or 87. He said when he wasn't even a musician, he approached me in, I think, Radebeul or Meißen or somewhere, while we were getting our stuff from the stage after the concert. And he said, I was packing my stuff, and then he came up with a friend, and he approached us for a conversation. And I took the time, like, I don't know, 20 minutes or something. He said, to talk to him, and he was so impressed because I wasn't so arrogant. I would really speak to him, that he would tell me that like 35 years later, or even 38 years later. So you were kind of close to your fans because there wasn't much opportunity actually to isolate yourself. There was no backstage in a real sense of today's meaning. You wouldn't have your own personal roadie or stuff. You would just do the stuff yourself, like, clean your cables and pedals and stuff. And so, of course, you were on the same level like the audience, and that formed a kind of a community.
Right. Now, you've mentioned that there was, of course, this incredibly active live scene in East Germany. Now, the impression I've gotten from other musicians, like, for instance, Andre Herzberg, who was, of course, from Pankow, who you've already mentioned, is that a lot of this was happening at this really rural level. Even major bands going to these small towns and playing, 14 days back to back from village to village. Was that also the case in the contour wave and punk scenes, or was it mostly big cities?
It was not only big cities. There was a lot of big cities, but there were... How many big cities did we have? 15? Bigger cities, not big cities, but, something considered a city. We played a lot in smaller villages and smaller communities where people came from all around, from further away, to see us, even though they were not maybe living right there in that village. But they came from, 20 kilometers away or 30 or something. And so we played everywhere. I think a lot of bands did that.
Yes, we basically had 3 relevant cities in East Germany: Berlin, Leipzig, Dresden. That was it. And the audience in Berlin was less enthusiastic than the guys in Dresden, for instance, or in Leipzig. So, as a musician, you were happy to play like in Saxony, Thuringia, Saxony-Anhalt, and there were a lot of pubs on the countryside who had ballrooms, and they would have the audience, and Freigang, for instance, did a great job to introduce the new bands to their old audience. Andertalk would just allow like Feeling B, even when it didn't have Spielerlaubnis, to play with Freigang as their special guests. And so the old, blues rock hero Andertalk Freigang helped to give birth to a new scene. And we experienced on the countryside that very often, like the Kunden, which means the long-haired blues parka-wearing freaks, and the punks would melt, would kind of being friendly to each other and having fun on the same party.
Let's finish with the track so that we finish on that lovely positive note. This is Wir by Sandow from the Paroktikum sessions.
Ich häng mich da nicht mehr rein. Eure Tränen sind mir zu hochgeschraubt. Ich lass euch allein. Wieder habt ihr die Natürlichkeit begraben. Auf der Seite der Traurigkeit.
This was Undertalk episode 6 with Padraig Parkhurst, the Australian musicologist and musician who spent so much time on the research of East German music. And we are very much looking forward to meet him again for a second part.